Hey guys, tonight we step through a creaking wooden door and into the warmth of a 14th century Italian bakery where the ovens glow like embers from an old dream and the air is thick with flour and something else, something heavier. The floor is cold beneath your bare feet, but the fire's already alive, crackling low, throwing shadows on the stone walls like it's been waiting for you. And maybe it has. You pass a table scattered with dough-covered bowls, linen cloths, and the strange hush of early morning industry. No birdsong yet, no bells from the church, just the quiet slap of dough being shaped and the creak of a wooden paddle sliding it toward the flame, then a glint. Just for a second as the baker folds a round loaf. Not a crusty edge, not a dusting of salt, but something metallic, something hidden. You blink and realize you're not here for breakfast. You're here for a mystery that begins before the sun is up and might never fully come into the light. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you all listen, from whether you're in Florence, Florida, or just lying under a blanket somewhere with headphones and a sleepy cat. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The baker doesn't speak as he folds the dough. His hands are quick practiced, but careful. There's something reverent in the way he wraps that small silver coin into the center of the loaf, like he's tucking away a prayer, or a secret, or both. This is Siena around the year 1329. The city's still glowing from its golden age, though the cracks are beginning to show, wars, taxes, guild pressure, and the ever-fickle harvest. But bread is still everything. Bread is life. Bread is politics. Bread is how messages move when it's too dangerous to speak them aloud. The bakers rise long before anyone else. Their trade is one of quiet power feeding the city before it wakes. And in this tiny window of time before the inspectors arrive, and the markets open, and the church bells start their endless commentary, a man can slip something small and precious into a loaf, seal it with crust, and send it out into the world. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or just a few rogue bakers with good hands and better intentions. Some call it resistance. Some call it superstition. A few even suggest it was just a strange form of luck spreading, like tossing salt over your shoulder, only with much better carbs. But the stories linger. They linger like the scent of rosemary in warm dough, or the heat of an oven that never quite dies even when the flames are gone. You watch the baker finish shaping the last loaf. He brushes it with oil, scores a subtle line across the top. No one would notice it unless they knew to look. Then into the oven it goes. The apprentice, half awake, still yawning, starts sweeping the floor, sending clouds of flour into the air like ghosts of yesterday's bread. The baker finally speaks. One word. Ready. You don't ask what he means, because you already know. And outside, the sky is lightening. The city's beginning to stir. Soon the inspectors will come, the guild enforcers, the market criers, the watchful priests. But for now, in this small flickering moment of dough and fire, something silent has already been set in motion. Something round and silver and hidden. And if someone finds it, someone who understands it, might just change everything. You slip out of the bakery just as the city exhales its first breath of morning. The streets are still mostly quiet, but you can hear the rumble beginning, the squeak of wagon wheels, the clipped heels of early merchants, the splash of chamber pots dumped from upstairs windows. Watch your head. Siena is waking, and with it comes the whole slow machine of its medieval daily grind. Tradesmen arguing over prices, washerwomen setting up at the fountains, and nobles yawning behind velvet curtains. You carry your basket low, not just to keep it close, but to keep it quiet. Most of the loaves are ordinary plain crusty rounds of wheat and rye, but one of them holds a coin. And that makes this delivery different. Bread in 14th century Italy isn't just food. It's regulated, taxed, weighed, inspected, and depending on who you ask, spiritually judged. You don't just bake what you want. You bake what you're allowed to. The grain itself is already political. Siena has strict controls over milling and selling. You can't just grow your own, grind your own, and bake in peace, not unless you want fines or worse. Instead, bakers have to purchase grain from sanctioned vendors at fixed rates, on specific days, with inspectors hovering like hawks. And when there's a shortage, good luck. Grain shortages in Italy aren't rare. One bad harvest, one late shipment, and prices spike like angry porcupines. During famines, bakers are caught between starving neighbors and grain merchants with knives in their smiles. You either raise prices and face riots, or you don't and go under. Sometimes literally. A few bakers were thrown into wells for hoarding. That's not a metaphor. And then there are the guilds. The Arte dei Fornai. The Bakers Guild is your overlord and your only protection. They regulate everything: who gets to bake, where, how much, and when. They set the weight of loaves, the size, the price, even the type of flour you're allowed to use. If you bake outside those rules, you're not a rebel. You're a criminal. Historians still argue whether the guilds were benevolent protectors or cartel-light enforcers with powdered hands and sharp ledgers. Either way, their reach is long and their patience is short. And it's within that world, a world where baking is tightly controlled, but hunger is wild, that coins start slipping into loaves. You duck into a narrow alley where the morning sun hasn't quite reached. The walls here are close-built more for shade than comfort, and the air still carries the chill of night. You knock on a wooden door once, twice, pause, then once more. A rhythm, not a request. The door opens. A woman appears, face drawn, eyes sharp. She says nothing, just glances at the basket. You hand her the loaf. Not a loaf, the loaf. She doesn't smile, doesn't nod, just closes the door. And just like that, the coin is passed. Was it a bribe? Thank you. A payment for something too risky to speak aloud. You'll never know. That's the thing with these coin loaves. They don't always come with instructions. They're silent transactions in a loud world. They slip beneath the weight of taxes, the gaze of inspectors, the ears of gossip. They are messages sealed in crust, and no one talks about them. Not out loud, but in back rooms and quiet corners, people share looks, or make signs, or slide a loaf across the table just a little too gently. It's not just Siena. Whispers say it's happening in Florence, Bologna, even parts of southern France. Bakers working quietly, slipping messages or metal into the folds of flour, one loaf at a time. And you keep walking, back toward the bakery, back toward the oven, because the next batch is already rising, and there's always someone else waiting to hear what can't be said. By the time you return, the sun is fully awake, and so are the officials. Two men stand in front of the bakery, each wearing heavy wool coats stitched with the insignia of the grain office. One carries a ledger, the other a long rod and a brass scale. They're not here for bread. They're here for control. Inside, the baker wipes his hands, already looking like he regrets every life choice that led him to this exact moment. You follow him in and take your place behind the counter. The inspectors step across the threshold without asking. There are rules about this. Technically, they're supposed to wait for an invitation, but you know how it goes. They're hungry, and not just for bread. First, they weigh the loaves two at random from the morning's rack. The brass weight is dropped into the scales dish, and each loaf is tested against the guild standard. It passes, barely. You exhale quietly. Then they tap the crust. Not too hard, just enough to listen. Cracks, too thin, too thick, everything says something. Then comes the slicing. One loaf, chosen completely at random, of course, is cut clean through the middle. Crumb is checked. Moisture, texture. The apprentice watches like he's witnessing a surgery. The coin isn't in that one. Thank the saints. The inspector frowns anyway. He claims the crust is uneven, the scoring uncertain. A note is made in the ledger, not a fine. Yet. Just a suggestion. Then he lingers. He fingers a loaf, taps another, leans in to sniff the flour bin. Unusually fragrant, he says. You resist the urge to tell him that's because it's actual bread. and not the air-dry disappointment he's probably used to eating. Instead, you smile. The baker offers a small loaf crusted with olives, warm from the second oven. The inspector takes it. His assistant pockets a handful of dried fig rolls, pretending not to, and then they leave. You don't breathe until the door clicks shut. Historians still argue whether these inspections were truly about maintaining quality or simply providing yet another tool for the elite to enforce their control over common people. Some scholars point to records showing bribes in the form of pastries, honey-dipped treats, or entire sacks of flour. Others suggest inspectors actually were obsessed with consistency. Bakers in Bologna were once fined because their loaves were a thumb too pale. A thumb. In any case, you're lucky today, but not always, because there have been times, maybe too many, when the wrong coin ended up in the wrong loaf, when the inspector bit into his gift and found a glint of silver where only soft bread should have been. One such baker, according to a dusty record from Venice, claimed the coin fell in by accident. He was whipped anyway. That's the risk, because while a coin might buy silence, it might also scream louder than a crowd. You return to the back where the fire has dipped low. The apprentice stirs the coals and adds another log. The dough is rising. Slowly. You take a seat on a worn stool and wipe your hands. They smell like yeast salt, and maybe a little, like defiance. There's an art to hiding coins. Some bakers nestle them deep in the belly of the dough. Others press them in from underneath, then fold the loaf so it rises over the top, like a secret sealed in skin. Some wrap them in parchment, others don't. A few rub them with oil, believing it helps the coin glide into the right hands. And then there's the scoring. To most eyes, it's just a pattern. A few slashes with a knife. Decorative. Practical. But for those who know, it's a message. 3 diagonal cuts might mean, for the widow, a single deep slash for the priest. NX. That's a warning. You never ask what kind. Of course there are no official codes. Nothing written. Everything passed hand to hand, eye to eye, breath to breath. You slice into a loaf, one of the safe ones, and test its weight. Perfect. You glance toward the sealed basket in the corner, the one with tomorrow's message already waiting inside. Because even when the inspectors come and the rules tighten and the guilds press harder, the bread still rises, and so do you. The next morning, the mist still clings to the gutters when you step outside, basket slung over one arm and a loaf tucked carefully beneath the cloth. Not just any loaf. That loaf, the one with the coin inside. There's a rhythm to the streets now. You know which puddles to avoid, which corners host the gossiping widows, which doors open for deliveries without a word. Your walk isn't hurried, but it's purposeful. You move like someone carrying more than bread. Because you are, today's coin isn't for charity, or a thank you, or even quiet payment. It's for a meeting, an arrangement, a warning. Historians still argue whether this tradition of coin-stuffed bread was born from desperation invention or clever rebellion. The earliest mention is vague, a line in a merchant's diary from Genoa, describing a loaf that gave more than sustenance. Was it metaphor? Or was it the first record of something now mostly remembered in whispers? Whichever it was, the practice grew legs. Florence, Bologna, Naples, even into southern France and Catalonia. Stories spread of bakers who passed silver coins in crusted envelopes, sometimes wrapped, sometimes bare, sometimes accompanied by a crumbly scrawl in Latin or a smudge of ash on the heel of the loaf. In one legend, possibly exaggerated, but that's part of the charm, a baker in Perugia sent a coin-stuffed focaccia to a knight's servant. The coin's value matched the bribe needed to delay a troop movement. The delay changed a skirmish's outcome, and while no scrolls confirm it, the family of that baker was mysteriously exempt from taxation for the next decade. Of course, sometimes it wasn't so dramatic. Sometimes the coin simply meant, "I'm still here." Sometimes it meant yes, sometimes just thank you. The loaf you carry today is marked subtly, one long curve across the top ending in a tiny dot. A snail's trail to most, but the recipient will know. It's not about beauty, it's about recognition. Because in a world where words are watched, flour becomes the quiet language of trust. You arrive at a blacksmith's workshop closed, but not locked. You leave the loaf on the steps, nestled in a folded cloth. You don't knock. He'll find it, or someone will. And now the coin moves forward. Back at the bakery, you help with the next round of kneading. This time, it's the apprentice who asks quietly, "How do you decide who gets one?" You shrug, because the answer is, you feel it. It's not always clear. There's no register, no code book, just a sense. A look, a quiet need, a shared glance at the market stall, a nod from across a crowded church pew. A coin means different things in different mouths. One old baker used to say a coin in bread is just a rumor with a crust. And he wasn't wrong. There are stories, of course. One of the most famous half-truth, half-myth is about a widow in Lucca who found a gold florin in her daily loaf. She used it to buy back her husband's sword from a pawnbroker, not knowing the baker had stolen the coin from a corrupt tax official's stash. Weeks later, the official's guards traced the blade to her, but couldn't prove anything. The baker vanished. Some say he fled to Venice. Others say he opened a shop right under their noses, still baking, still hiding. You never know which version is true, but that's the beauty of it. The bread remembers, even if people don't. The days begin to blend, dough-rising fires, glowing the rhythmic slap of flour against wood. But with each passing morning, more loaves carry more than just air and grain. They carry intention. Not everyone sees it. Most don't. They bite through crust and chew thoughtfully, maybe grumble about salt levels or bless the soft crumb. But those who know, oh, they look closer. They break their loaf open slowly. They glance over their shoulder. They run their thumb along the bottom, feeling for a tucked edge or a subtle seam. And sometimes they find silver, but even more telling is the crust. Because in Siena and Florence, in 100 small villages and parishes tucked between vineyards and hills, the scoring of a loaf can speak louder than any scribe. You sit at the bench blade in hand. Not too sharp, it shouldn't cut, only whisper. With each pass across the dough, you draw more than decoration. You inscribe meaning. One diagonal slash, safe to talk. 2 parallel lines, the coin is inside. A long curve trailing to the right, not for you. Bakers whisper these codes to their apprentices not in lessons, but in muscle memory. They pass hands over dough-shaping knowledge through repetition. It's not written down, never will be. That's part of the point. Historians still argue whether these markings were part of an organized system, or just the scattered habits of independent minds trying to say what their mouths couldn't. Some evidence from Pisa shows guild fines for unusual scoring, which might hint at suppression. One surviving loaf in a museum in Parma, rock-hard, now fossilized, bears 4 distinct slashes and a half-etched spiral. No one knows what it meant, but someone once did. And the ingredients, those mattered too. A loaf with time was often a gift. Something comforting, healing perhaps. Rosemary might mean a message for a widow. Caraway, a warning. And if a loaf was too perfect, that was suspicious. Real bread is flawed. Real messages hide in cracks. You remember one loaf months ago now that wasn't yours. It came wrapped in linen. No marks. Plain flour, but inside a chestnut. Not roasted, not split. Just nestled in the center like a seed. You never found out who sent it, or why. But you kept the shell. Sometimes you still carry it in your apron. Because bread, when used this way, becomes memory. A way of remembering without writing. A way of communicating without being caught. The apprentice watches you score today's loaves with more attention than usual. He doesn't ask questions. Not directly, but he's watching your hands. The rhythm. The symbols. He's starting to learn the language. You hand him a blade. Try one, you say. He hesitates, then makes a line. A crooked one. That means nothing, you chuckle. He frowns. Tries again. A single diagonal. clean, confident. Now it means something. In the corner, an old woman waits quietly. She buys the same loaf every third day, always in the late morning, never speaks. Today, you give her a slightly larger one scored with 2 lines. Inside, a worn coin. Not much, but it will help. She doesn't thank you. She just nods. The kind of nod that makes your chest ache a little. And still the bread keeps rising, even as rules tighten, even as mouths grow more careful, even as secrets pile higher than flour sacks. Because every crust carries meaning now. Every fold holds the weight of what can't be said aloud. And somewhere in the heat of your oven, a dozen silent voices are already taking shape. You close up shop just as the sun begins to spill gold across the upper balconies of Sienna's rooftops. The scent of warm bread still clings to your clothes, but the ovens are cooling the coals quiet. The street sounds begin to fade, the clamor of the market is winding down, and the chatter turns into murmurs. It's the hour between the bustle and the hush. The perfect time for a different kind of delivery. You reach beneath the counter and retrieve a wrapped bundle not large, but heavier than it looks. Inside, a loaf, crust scored with a curl, and a cross barely visible unless someone's looking for it. Inside that loaf, 2 coins. One tucked toward the heel, the other near the crown. One message sent, one answer returned. This loaf is not for a widow, not for the hungry. It's for a lover. Historians often skip this part of the story, or they file it under folk traditions or superstition. But ask anyone who's handled these loaves long enough, and they'll tell you, bread has carried more than money. It's carried hearts. You take the alley that winds past the apothecary shop, the one that always smells of dried mint and regret. You follow the curve of the street until it pinches into a tight corner where 2 buildings lean too closely together. And there behind a rain barrel and beneath a shutter that never fully closes, you leave the loaf. You don't knock, you don't wait, but you know she'll find it. There's a reason this loaf has 2 coins. One is hers, the other yours, sent back to you a week ago, nestled in a crust of sweet fig bread. You hadn't spoken in months, not since her father forbade it. But when you cracked open that loaf and saw the small silver coin stamped with the merchant seal her family uses, you knew. She still remembers. In a world where letters can be intercepted, where messengers are bribed, and where even a glance in the wrong piazza can ruin lives, bread is safer. Bread has plausible deniability. It's just lunch, you could always say. Even if the loaf sings with rosemary and fig and smells exactly like her, historians still argue whether coin bread romance was ever widespread, or just an embellishment from a few poetic townspeople and romantic scribes. One rare Florentine poem from the mid-1300s describes a golden round of crust and courage passed between 2 hearts beneath crust's kiss. Maybe that's a metaphor. Or maybe someone fell in love with a baker. You wouldn't be the first. There are more stories. One from Ferrara tells of a loaf passed between spies, each coin marking a safe house. Another from Lucca, where a loaf held not coins, but carved bone tokens, each signifying a location. The stories twist between fact and tale like steam from a cooling rack, impossible to hold, but comforting to follow. And then there's your own story. You return to the bakery. The apprentice is already sweeping. He hums something tuneless, too young to understand what's just passed between hands in crust and coin. You say nothing, but later, after he's gone, you'll check the shutter again, just in case there's a loaf left in return. Because sometimes coins aren't payment, they're promises. You sit beside the oven as the coals turn to ash. You listen to the silence, broken only by the occasional pop of cooling stone. And for just a moment, you remember the way she laughed, the way she said your name like it was an ingredient only she knew how to use. Maybe it's foolish, but so is baking sometimes. You work all day to make something that disappears in a mouthful. But when it carries meaning, when it holds love or warning or hope, suddenly that mouthful becomes something eternal. So you keep baking, because who knows, the next loaf might carry her voice. The next week begins with a cracked tooth, not yours, a customer. He storms in just after noon, cheeks red, voice rising. holding a piece of crust and something shiny in the palm of his hand. Not in a cloth, not discreet. Right there in public. A silver coin jagged on one edge, glinting in the midday light like a betrayal. You step forward, smile, apologize. I must have been counting flour. Not silver, you say softly with a chuckle, light enough to pass for embarrassment. He doesn't laugh. The cracked molar is real. So is the insult. He was not in the know. This was not a message for him. And now the entire shop holds its breath. The apprentice freezes. Two regulars duck out. A market woman clutches her chest like she's about to witness a duel. This is the danger. The risk baked into the loaf. When the wrong person finds the right coin, it's happened before. It always does. In Bologna, a baker was flogged after a nobleman bit into a bribe meant for a priest. In Florence, one woman supposedly sued her own cousin for sneaking witchcraft into her breakfast. There's even a record from Genoa describing a brawl that broke out in the plaza after a soldier mistook a coin for a cursed charm. Historians still argue whether these incidents were common or simply sensationalized. One chronicle from Padua refers to the Great Loaf Trial, where 5 bakers were interrogated over a single hollow loaf. Another entry, written in a clerk's trembling hand, mentions bread sorcery, though no one's entirely sure what that meant. You glance at the coin again. It's not yours. At least not today. Wrong marking, wrong size. This didn't come from your oven. But there's no time to explain that now. The customer is furious. He's shouting about inspector's fines retribution. So you refund him. 2 loaves, fresh, no coin, no words. Just bread. He storms out, leaving behind the shiny culprit. You pick it up and roll it between your fingers. Not yours, which means someone else is baking messages in your district. The thought settles heavy in your chest. There's comfort in being the only one. It makes the risk feel like a calling, not a competition. But now someone else has flour on their hands and silver in their sleeves. You ask around quietly. No names, just murmurs, hints. You stop by the butcher, the scribe, even the spice seller who never sells you anything but always seems to know too much. Someone new, someone on the edge of town, a woman, young, fierce, or so they say. Used to be a cook in a noble house, disgraced after a scandal involving a missing necklace and a stewed duck. She opened a small bakery last spring. Her bread is good. Her crusts are better. And apparently, she has a taste for mystery. You think about visiting, but not yet. Because tonight you're baking a different kind of message. A loaf with no coin, but scored in a very particular way. You send it to the cathedral, to a deacon with a bad knee and a sharp mind. Someone who understands silence better than most. No coin, just marking. It's enough, because even without metal, the bread speaks. And sometimes words are the most dangerous thing you can hide. That night, the apprentice finally asks what's been heavy on his tongue for weeks. Why do we do it? You look at him, really look, and you don't say much, just hand him a loaf, scored, empty, but full of meaning. He nods. Maybe he understands. Maybe he will someday. Because not every message needs to be found. Some just need to be sent. The next time you pass the cathedral, the deacon is already waiting. He doesn't approach you, doesn't even acknowledge your presence, just stands there hunched beneath his hood as pigeons squabble over crumbs in the courtyard. But you see it, the loaf in his hand, mostly eaten, except for the crust. The crust you scored. He nods once, slow, barely more than a breath. It's enough. There's no coin, no message, no parchment or symbol, just bread and trust, and the quiet understanding between 2 people who've learned how to read silence better than words. You walk on feeling the weight of the moment settle between your ribs like warm air. But as you round the corner toward the apothecary, someone catches your eye. She's young, no apron, no flour on her clothes, but she's watching you. And when you glance back, she's already disappeared into the crowd. Later that evening, the old spice seller leans in over a scoop of anise seeds and murmurs, "She baked for the Montelli family once, before they lost their titles. He pauses. She's clever and careful, but she's playing your game now. You nod, because you already knew. It was only a matter of time before someone else picked up the blade and started speaking in crust. And she's not the only one. The rumors are spreading. In Florence, a guild apprentice was caught stuffing a small ring inside a honeyed roll. In Naples, a baker passed a wrapped locket through a series of loaves bound for the docks. And in Ravenna, someone's been baking tiny wax-sealed scrolls into flatbread, using stale fruit to disguise the weight. Historians still argue whether this was an organized movement or just coincidence, but there's a pattern forming, an echo, one that's impossible to track fully because it never leaves a paper trail, just crumbs. The church begins to notice. One sermon shouted from a pulpit in Verona warns of the corruption of the sacred loaf. Another priest calls for the purification of ovens. A third, more ambitious, declares that stuffing coins into bread is literally inviting the devil to dinner. But not all clergy oppose it. Some smile softly. One friar, known for his love of walnut loaves and leniency on Confession Day, is rumored to have passed more coins than communion wafers. Quiet generosity masked in daily ritual. And it's no surprise, after all, who watches what a friar eats. You bake for him often. He never speaks of it. But you always add a second line across the top of his loaf. He always leaves a copper behind, tucked into the crook of the counter. It's not about the money. It's about the message. You begin noticing small signs, other bakers mimicking your scores, your shapes, even your ingredient codes. A loaf with thyme and clove, a twisted end on a rye stick. Subtle, careful imitations. Some do it with reverence. Some just want to belong. But one day a loaf arrives at your door, left anonymously, still warm, scored in your old pattern, the one you haven't used in months. Inside a note, no coin, just a folded scrap of parchment that reads, "We learned from you." You stare at it longer than you should, because now it's no longer just you. The language has spread. The message lives in other ovens, under other fingernails, across cities and hills and time. Bread has become a movement, not loud, not violent, but persistent, baked into daily life like a hymn you hum without knowing the words. You fold the note, tuck it away, then pick up your blade, because tomorrow you bake again, and someone somewhere is waiting for their loaf to speak. You dream of loaves, not just the ones you've baked, but those scattered across Italy, loaves, turning in ovens from Venice to Palermo, crusts splitting like lips ready to speak. In your dream, each one carries something: a coin, a ring, a pressed flower, a memory wrapped in linen, and they all hum the same low tune, like a lullaby made of flour and fire. When you wake, the tune lingers in your chest. Outside, it's raining, soft, relentless. The kind of rain that seeps through roof tiles and memory. You stoke the fire, but the oven is slower to heat today. The apprentice is quiet too, more thoughtful than usual, brushing flour from the boards with careful hands. He doesn't speak until your second batch is rising. They're watching. He says, barely louder than the rain. You nod. Because they are. A few days ago, a noble steward bought 5 loaves and returned one untouched, citing irregular texture. When you cut it open, you found a linen-wrapped pebble where the coin should have been. Not a mistake, a message. Another time, a guildmaster passed by and sniffed the air too deeply. "Smells of change," he muttered. And you couldn't tell if he meant politics or time. The watchers are real, and they're curious. Historians still argue whether this rising scrutiny came from fear or fascination. One suggests that the sudden popularity of coin loaves threatened the guild's monopoly on trust. Another believes the nobility felt mocked because humble bread had become more powerful than their decrees. Either way, the backlash begins. New laws roll out. Loaves shall bear no obstruction. Inspectors may crack any crust, even a proposed measure that requires all bread to be sold, pre-sliced, to ensure transparency. You laugh when you hear that one, because even sliced bread can lie. Still, the risk grows. You hear of a baker in Verona fined for misuse of dough. In Lucca, a woman's bakery is shut down after she's caught sending a coin to a debtor. And in Florence, whispers say someone's been imprisoned for baking without permission. You look at your hands, flour under your nails, heat in your palms, knowledge carved in muscle. You could stop. You've done enough. The language exists now. Others speak it. Others bake it. But you don't. Because it's not about legacy, or rebellion, or even tradition. It's about the woman who comes every Friday for a single salted round, hoping for a glint inside. It's about the apprentice now fluent in your scoring, who carves his own quiet hopes into crust. It's about the world needing a way to say what can't be said. And bread. Bread listens. That evening after the shop is closed and the fire has turned to coals, you prepare a final batch, not for sale, not for delivery, just for sharing. You slice one open, no coin, just a dried violet. You wrap it in cloth score, a spiral on the top, and set it aside. A gift, a goodbye, a beginning. Because soon the watchers may knock. But tonight the oven still glows, and the bread still speaks. The knock comes 3 days later, not at dawn, not when the ovens are full and the air is thick with spice and steam. No, they wait until the hush of late afternoon when the day's bread is already cooling and your shoulders are tired from carrying more than flour. 3 men, dark robes, guild badges. Their faces are careful masks, expressions tight with authority, and just a hint of guilt, like they know they're about to ruin something sacred. You open the door. You don't speak. They ask for your records. You smile. We don't write anything down. They ask for your blades. You hand them your spare, clean, dull, almost ceremonial now. They ask about the scoring. You shrug. Decoration. It helps the steam escape. They don't laugh. One of them, taller, softer spoken, asks if you've ever altered a loaf. Ever hidden a message, a coin, a sign. You meet his eyes, and you say the most dangerous thing a baker can say. I've told the truth in crust. He blinks and writes something in his ledger. You're not arrested, not today. Instead, they post a seal across your oven, a red wax sigil meant to say, you've been seen. You're still allowed to sell what's already baked, but you can't bake again until the guild grants permission. A process that could take weeks, or months, or never happen at all. The oven cools fast without fire. By nightfall, the hearth is dark for the first time in years. The apprentice paces. The regulars knock and leave empty-handed. The air smells wrong like silence without warmth. You sit behind the counter and rest your hands on the wood. This isn't the end, because you know what they don't. The language is alive. You've taught it to the apprentice, to the friar, to the woman who bakes on the edge of town and leaves loaves with matching scores. You've baked it into every loaf that left your hands, and now it ripples across cities like heat from a morning oven. Historians still argue whether the practice ever truly stopped after the guild crackdown. Some say it went deeper underground. Some believe it moved into pastries, pies, even communion wafers. Others claim it never ended at all, because bread, once it speaks, doesn't forget how. Later that week, you walk to the cathedral. You don't carry anything. No basket, no blade, no coin, just memory. You sit on the stone bench beneath the old fig tree, watching the pigeons strut like they own the plaza. The friar passes you by, slow and limping. He doesn't stop, but he drops something at your feet. A loaf, still warm, scored with a familiar pattern. You don't open it. You don't need to, because it's not the coin that mattered, or the message. It was the act, the risk, the love baked into every ounce of dough. Back home, you place the loaf on your old counter, then open your oven. The wax seal cracks. You start the fire, and tomorrow, you bake again. Because the world still needs quiet ways to say impossible things, and no matter what they forbid, someone somewhere will always be hungry for truth. The oven glows again, but softer now. Not with defiance, not with noise, just with purpose. The coals crack gently beneath a sleeping hearth, and the room is hushed, like it's waiting for the next loaf to rise, not just with yeast, but with meaning. You sit in the stillness palms, resting against the wood that's known 1,000 needs, and your breath begins to stretch slow and steady. The world, for all its shouts and judgments, can't silence this rhythm. It's in the dusting of flour that still floats in the air in the crease of a palm, where dough once pressed in the tiny score on the heel of a crust that meant hold on just a little longer. Outside, the streets dim. Inside, you remember. The woman who smiled when she found her coin. The apprentice who learned to speak without a word. The friar who always left a copper, even when he had none to spare. The silence between all those moments. A silence that was never empty. Just waiting. Waiting for someone to listen. So you close your eyes now, listener. Let your breath settle with the bread. Let the warmth of the oven become the weight of your blanket. Let the stories of old Siena knead your thoughts into something slow, something soft. Not everything needs to be solved. Not everything needs to be said. Some things just need to rise quietly. Like truth, like memory, like a coin in a crust. Thank you for joining us on this journey today. Maybe by now you've already drifted off to sleep, and if so, we hope this story brought you peace of mind and helped you rest a little easier. Deep sleep makes life better, and we're truly happy to be part of that. Until next time, sweet dreams.